Take one. Action.
Hello plasterers, yeah, I'm back again for another plastering video. Before you ask, I'm still an amateur, so anything I tell you is just one amateur to another amateur. Someone who wants to learn plastering, hopefully this video will help. So the reason I'm making this video is after the last one I got quite a lot of good feedback. So if you've seen the first video about skimming a wall and how a beginner could do that, you'll also notice I've had rather a lot of comments, and the comments have been, in the most part, very constructive and very helpful. Some of them not so much, in quite a range. So some people have said, well, I bet you're a professional, which is very nice but not true, and some people have said, what a complete muppet, he doesn't know what he's doing. So quite a mix. So yeah, no end of amusement in those comments, so thanks for those. So what I'm going to do today is something slightly different, plastering a ceiling. So as you can see, I'm in my half-built extension that I'm putting on the house, and I've got a garage ceiling to do, hence the pink plasterboard, because it's fireproof and there's a room above. So before I get on with that and show you how I plaster a ceiling, not necessarily how a professional would do it, but how I do it and maybe you could do it, a couple of the tips that I got and I've picked up from the previous comments, which will hopefully stop some of you having to comment on this video the same things. Yes, okay, I get it, this is a trowel and not a float. I get it, no more comments required. This is a float, I think, but this is a trowel, and if I call it a float at any point, I'm very sorry. Okay, other tips, and you'll notice a lot of comments on my mixing. Top comment really there was, make sure you put your water in first. So when you're mixing in your bucket, stick your water in the bucket first and add the plaster rather than the other way around. And I have to say I didn't have any problems, and that's because I spent quite a lot of time mixing it, as again some of you commented, but it's obviously a lot easier if you try putting the water in first. So that's what I've been doing recently, and that's what I'll do today. So the other thing is, make sure the water you're adding is absolutely crystal clean. So I was using water that I'd washed some tools in, and that can apparently affect the chemical reactions going on. So an amendment there is, make sure the water you add is absolutely crystal clear before you start mixing. So the other top tip I've received from the comments is, make sure your working area is really, really clean. And as you can see at the moment, this garage is full of junk and full of, the floors all covered in bits of gravel and things, yeah, so really, really grubby in here. So I'm going to make sure this is all really clean and tidy before I start. And the reason for that is, firstly, when you're doing a ceiling, particularly if, like me, you're a bit of an amateur, you're going to drop a lot of plaster on the floor, a lot of it is going to splatter over all this stuff in it. So you don't want all your stuff in the garage or all over your building site covered in plaster, and also it just makes moving around and doing things a lot easier. So that's my next job, is get cracking on getting everything tidy, and then I'll come back and talk about the prep. Okay, back in a minute. Now, the other thing I forgot to mention is we have, of course, my glamorous assistant, the tea fairy, is back again. So she's in charge of the camera, making the tea and stunts today, and she's also done my hair and makeup, so thanks for that. Cut. Right, so we've reached that stage in the job in that we've achieved something, which is clearing the floor, so it must be time for a cup of tea. Oh, thanks. Basically, I've just cleared the area underneath the bit of ceiling we're doing. So I've got these two steels in, dividing the room into three, and I'm just going to do this middle section of the ceiling today, so that's enough. So before I start on the actual plastering, one piece of advice is that if you're new to plastering and you're thinking of having a go, don't start on the ceiling. The ceiling is hard. Gravity is really working against you, you'll get plaster everywhere, and it's also quite hard work. By the end of plastering, what is this fairly small bit of ceiling, I'm going to be pretty tired and my shoulder will be aching, and I'll probably have plaster in my hair and eyebrows. So if you're going to have a go at plastering, start on a wall, preferably a small wall, and if you can, even just go and buy a sheet of plasterboard and have a practice on that in your garage. Don't start on a ceiling in your house, because you'll probably end up disappointed. So in terms of prep, this ceiling has had it's had a good coat of PVA, and before I start today I'm going to give it another coat just to make sure that it's really well covered. You'll see on the steels up here, so the steels are boxed in with timbers, there's beading on, but I'm probably not going to plaster on that beading today. I'm just going to do the ceiling part. So the plaster I'm using is the Thistle multi-finish. So that's the skim coat, same stuff I used in the previous video. And you'll see from this pile here, I've got two types of plaster. So I've got hard wall and I've got skim coat. So the hard wall is for a different type of plastering, and that's what I'll be doing in that room over there. To actually plaster straight onto the blockwork. So if you're not sure what type of plaster to use, what you can do is have a look at the Thistle, which is the British Gypsum website, and they've got a very good product selector on there, which you tell it, you can look down and see what type of wall you got, what finish you want, and it will tell you what you want. If not, there are actually some very helpful chaps at British Gypsum. You can phone up on their technical support line, and they'll give you all sorts of advice and get you going. So yeah, use those services, they're really good. Right. Yes, I will try, and if I can figure out how to do it, I'll put a URL to that website along here. Yeah, one other thing, I've treated myself to this lovely new bucket, and it's a lovely deep bucket. I mean, it's just perfect for mixing plaster. I got it from, I think, a company called Drywall Tools, online site, so really good, about, I think it was £16 or £17, but it's just perfect for mixing plastering, nice square bottom. Okay, one other thing, you'll notice there's some joints in the plasterboard up here. They've been covered over with scrim tape, so this is this sort of slightly tacky mesh tape you can get for joining boards together. So you put it across the gaps and make sure that you've got a good, every joint is completely covered with that. Okay, so as I said earlier, this ceiling has already had one coat of PVA. Before I start, I'm going to give it another one. And I think that'll just sort of moisten it up. It'll also make sure any bits are completely done. So as before, put it in a milk bottle, about 50-50 water and PVA. Give it a mix, roller, tray, goes on in about, I'll get this done in 5 minutes. You'll just give us a bit of footage.
Action.
Okay, so before I start plastering, my trowel is a bit mucky. I used it for floor screeding a couple of weeks ago, and so it got cleaned, but not really very good. So I'm going to give it a really good clean up. So any cement residue that's left on there, the plaster will just stick to it like crazy. So I really want to get this nice and clean and shiny, so I've got some emery cloth, and I'm going to give it a really good going over and get it all spotless before I start. So just a little bit of advice on that. If you've had a go at plastering and you think, oh, I can have a go at floor screeding, I found floor screeding really, really hard. I don't know quite why. You'd think it would be easier than plastering, but trust me, it wasn't. After 2 days of floor screeding, I was an absolute wreck. And I found it really difficult to get a good finish. So maybe there's some tips out there on floor screeding someone could share with me and do a video, but yeah, really hard work. So yeah, watch out if you think you can do floor screeding just because you can do a bit of plastering. So yeah, let's get on and give this a good clean up. Right, so it's time for a quick mix. So the PVA is dry, or pretty much dry. It'll be dry by the time I'm ready. So I'm going to mix up for that sort of area of the ceiling about 1/3 of a bag of plaster for the first coat. Now, on this Thistle stuff, if you look on the back, there is a bit of a guide on timings and amounts of water. So for a whole bag, I think it says 11.5 litres. So I'm going to put in about sort of 3.5, maybe, yeah, about 3.5 or 4 litres. So that's already in there. So I've got my big bucket there with lovely clean supply of water in it. I've got an old tatty bucket there with some water in it just.
Action.
Okay, now because I'm mixing outside on this sort of rubble, I've got to be really careful I don't put anything down and get dirt all over it. So keeping everything off the ground. don't overmix it. Right, so it's time for the first coat, the fun bit, getting the plaster on the ceiling, getting a bit of coverage. I'm aiming for a couple of mil thickness, make sure the screw heads are covered up properly. Just get it up there really. Right, so as you can see, the plaster dropping off everywhere. Don't worry about it. There's nothing underneath that you're worried about. Just there's a lump there. We'll flick that out. The underside is the hawk. Get rid of that. Any lumps, get rid of them quick. There's nothing but make your day hard. So I'm trying to be as systematic as possible, working in nice long lines. Seems a little bit bubbly this mix actually, but again for the first coat, don't worry about it. See, it's a pretty sloppy mix, this one. Bit of a low screw head there, so we'll put a bit of stick bit on there and spread it. Although I might say what you want to do is just get it up there as quick as possible and don't worry about it. Try and keep it smooth. The less imperfections and big ridges and things you've got in there, the better it'll make putting the second coat on easy. So like here where I've got some joins, hopefully you can see those between the trowel marks. When I get up there I'll just go over them and smooth them off as best I can. Right, so back with the second mix. That would have been nice to have a labourer who has all this sort of stuff ready for you and a few sets of tools. So yeah, everything is now completely cleaned again because you don't want any sort of starting to go off stuff mixed in with your fresh batch. So I'm just going to finish that bit and then immediately go and start the second coat, because that bit up there is just starting to firm up a bit. So by the time I've done this, we're ready to whiz back to the beginning. Yeah, full cut to that. Right, so that's the first coat completely on now, and it's gone on quite well, pretty good. Because I had this slight delay having to mix, I haven't got a chance for a rest. So quick swig of tea and just get back down the other end. Right, so this first coat, before I start on the second one, so you can easily stick your finger in it, and it's a bit like when you get a dairy lee triangle. That's what it's got, kind of firm but not hard. So this is still quite a runny mix, so I'm just going to put a second coat. There's a few bits up here that are quite thin, so I'll skim them over with sort of a thicker bit. So because this is a fireboard ceiling, I'm going to have to seal up all the way around the edge, but I probably should have done that before I started. I should have put filler in there or some foam, but I'll do that afterwards and paint over it. So no rub hand up. So second coat's got to be really systematic because it's very hard to see where you go. So I'm just going to run backwards and forwards in lines, applying a thin coat. I'm trying to get a bit of a finish on it now, but as long as it's flat and there's no holes, then second coat's So after you've been scraping around a bit, I've ended up with these bits where they've gone hard on the edge of the hawk. So I'm going to scrape them off, stick them in the rubbish, make sure it's all clean before I put more mix on. Right, so that's the second coat up. Still a few trowel marks on, so I'll go over and smooth them out. I have to say my arm is starting to really ache now, so I'll be glad when this is done. So yeah, second coat is on, quick run up and down, and then we'll get on to the polish coat. Okay, so we're now going to do the polishing. So I've got my trusty sprayer and the trowel that I've given a really good clean, so you can see it's you know, all nice and clean and shiny again, no lumps of set plaster on it. So what we're going to do is go around the edges. See, on the edges there's a few lumps and bits hanging off the plasterboard here. So we'll get rid of them. We don't want them getting dragged into it. And then a little bit of water for lubrication. And just start going over and really giving it that final smoothing down. So you see, it's a bit tricky around the edges because there is a few sort of sticky, lumpy bits. So we'll just, oops, we'll just get these off. Give it a bit more water. And you can actually hear when it's going right, because the trowel sort of makes a nice gliding noise. It's hard to describe unless you try it yourself, but you'll kind of get a feel for it. So a bit of water, just sounds right when it does that. You can see where the trowel's been, it's just leaving a lovely streak of smooth. So because it's now hard, I'm not leaving trowel marks down the edges of the trowel. So the whole thing starts to sort of join together in a nice smooth finish. So this ceiling is being painted, so what I want to do is over polish it. That's been pointed out to me, because that makes it very hard to paint. The paint just sort of slides about, and if it's too glassy finish. So I'm just going to get it so there's no marks left in it, and just get it looking really good. It's certainly not perfect. There's a few bits where the screws are slightly proud of the plaster, and that's partly because this plasterboard, being fireboard, is really tough stuff, very hard, so it's harder to get the screws in nicely, but it is a garage, so one thing I will do is keep perspective and not worry about it too much. If it was the bit of wall behind your TV that you look at every day, then you might worry about it, but it is a garage. When you're going up against an edge like this, what I tend to do is put the trowel up against the wall that's hard, and then slide it up, apply a bit of pressure and bring it out, and that way you get a nice clean edge along there, ready for the next wall's plaster to join into. There's a bit of a mess along this edge here, but I'll just do our best along it.
Action.
Right, so we're pretty much done now. I've given it a good polishing over. Once the light, remove the light around a bit, check for any bits that need one last stroke over, but pretty much done. So I'm quite happy with that. It's not perfect by any stretch. There's a couple of bits where the scrim tape is just showing through, but I think that's where it didn't sit perfectly flat on the ceiling. But there's going to be lights, it's going to get painted, so not to worry. So yeah, it's taken a couple of hours. I'm sure a professional would have done this whole ceiling and all the beams and everything in that time, but it's been quite good. We used about 2/3 of a bag of plaster, so it didn't really cost anything. Just a couple of reminders on the top tips, and that was clean water, add the water to the plaster, although I'm not sure it works, and this is a trowel. So I hope that was helpful. If it was, leave a comment. The other thing, if you do leave a comment saying that you're going to have a go yourself, having watched it, do comment back or post your own video. It'd be interesting to see how you get on. Any comments with naughty words will be deleted immediately. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thank you to Emma for helping, by the way. See ya, bye. So here we are 6 weeks later. See, the ceiling's now all the beams done, all the painting done, lights up, looking good. So coming next will be some plastering in here where I've got that wall to do. And as you can see, there's a rather large ceiling. Just keep me busy. We've reached that critical stage of the job in that we've completed something, which is clearing the floor, so it's time for a cup of tea. Put it in my hand. So it's going to piddle down with rain shortly, so I haven't got the opportunity to put all this stuff outside, particularly as a lot of it won't like getting wet. So because I've got steels either in cut.
Why can't you just talk?
Well, because this keep messing it up. Okay, right. Does my hair look good? I'll get the bottle opener.